Hello and welcome, everyone. It is great to be back on the show again. It's actually been a couple months since I last recorded, so I've just been feeling the need to get out there and share something. And thankfully, we're joined together with another host, another advisor from the Catholic Financial Planners Network, and so he's able to just share some of his wisdom and knowledge and insight on a particular matter that we haven't really addressed so far today in our show and in the podcast series, which we're going to delve a little more deeply into Thomas Aquinas, and particularly we're going to have like this theme of if Thomas Aquinas was your financial advisor, what kind of guidance would he give to you? So for those who are familiar with Thomas Aquinas, this will be super fascinating. For those who have not been introduced to Thomas Aquinas, we'll have some introductory comments to get to have you learn a little more. But Thomas is just a wonderful character in the life of the church, wonderful doctor of the church, and has lots to say on a lot of things. Certainly has lots to say on money as well, money and happiness in particular. But before we get further along, Chris, I just would like to introduce you to the audience. If you could just say a few words about yourself. Maybe one, you could just help me out with actually the pronunciation of your last name, because you told me about it before the show, and I'm not sure I got it down. So I'm just going to kick it over to you. You can share with us a little bit.
No, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. The pronunciation of my last name is Schilmoeller. It's a lot more intimidating when you're reading it as opposed to hearing it, but probably takes a few times. So Chris Schilmoeller, I'm in Orlando, Florida. I'm originally from Nebraska. I came down here with my working as a part of Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, which I joined after college. I did that for about 9 years, doing evangelization, discipleship type of work on college campuses, and then eventually became kind of part of regional leadership or regional director type of role. And that's what brought me down here to Florida. I'm married. We have 3 kids. My wife is from down here, and that's one of the reasons we stayed here. It's a little closer to her family, and my family being from Nebraska is fine flying down here, especially when there's snow on the ground up there.
Yeah, it's a good snowbirding excuse, right? Oh, let's go visit family and get out of the cold.
Yeah, it's great.
Here, right?
It's great. And now every once in a while, they have direct flights between here and Omaha, so it makes it even easier.
Well, gosh, that's just a wonderful shot. Although I have been in Omaha a number of times, and I must say, I've never been.
I mean, it's like summertime compared to you guys. Yeah. I mean, we don't have to.
That's right.
We don't have to plug in our cars at night or anything like that. So,
winter-wise, yeah. For those who may not know, I come from the the Northland of the country, and so you do have to plug in your vehicles during the winter to keep them to allow them to still start. So that's a whole other story in itself. But we do enjoy the cold up in these parts and find it to be rather endearing, actually. It makes you hardy. And as we like to also say, keeps the riprap out. And so
I agree. I think I've become a lot more soft being down here in the nice sunshine. My blood is thinned out a little bit, so.
Right, yeah, we may not be able to get you back this far north again, as far north as Nebraska. So, well, Chris, it sounds like as you were working with Focus, part of your intellectual pursuits, working with college students was a discussion with Thomas Aquinas. And since then you've become, kind of an avid reader of his thinking and just have become a big fan, and you like what he has to say. And, for the audience who maybe isn't familiar with Thomas Aquinas, what stands out to you in your mind? Like, what would you have to say to people who don't know this monk from the medieval ages?
Yeah. And it is kind of funny, right, to think about, we're talking about finance, and from the perspective of a 13th century mendicant friar who made a vow of poverty. Right. But I think there is a lot that he has to say. I mean, first of all, Thomas Aquinas, he's one of the great doctors of the church. He has contributed, so much to theology in the sense of he was used at a lot of the councils, even in our current catechism. He has really paved the way and quoted a lot. He is known as the common doctor, which is kind of in a sense is called the universal doctor, just because he's hit on so many topics. And what he did was such a great synthesis of everything that came before him. So his great knowledge of Scripture, as well as the doctors of the church, as well as some of the great philosophers, and he was able to bring it all together. And he didn't make a lot of really novel new ideas. But what he was able to do is synthesize everything that came before him and even make some conclusions on seemingly opposing opinions to really help move forward some big topics and set the foundation for the church after him to have a nice synthesis of everything. So in terms of him, one of the quotes that I really like, I think is really helpful. It's often quoted when you're reading different pieces on Aquinas, but he says it in a couple places. He says, "The work of the wise man is to order." And the idea of integration and order is something that I think we're lacking today. I see it in my practice even when people come in, the first thing I have to do is ask, why are things here and there and there? And why do you have this? And why do you have that? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know why I have all this stuff. So the first part of my job is bringing order to chaos a lot of times. And it's not just finances. I think it's with a lot of different parts of our lives. And I think we see it even in research about Catholics in general, about coming to Mass on Sundays. But do they actually believe what the church teaches, or do they believe in the real presence of the sacrament, or how they vote in elections? Is that aligned with actually what the church teaches? So I think we see a lot of fragmentation. And Thomas is great about bringing things together. He's not easy to come into. He's not easy to read. But as you begin to learn a little bit, you realize he actually is, as one 19th century Thomistic scholar said, he is all about common sense. His stuff is actually common sense when you really break it down and begin to understand it.
Yeah, and maybe just a follow-up comment to that, Chris. I would agree. Thomas is not easy reading. It's because his style or his methodology more so is very particular, and so you have to just become accustomed to how he's presenting himself. He's not easy in that regard, but he is incredibly thorough and incredibly methodical. And he's a slow cartography almost of just like inch by inch, a mapping out of intellectual thought. And
it's really quite amazing, yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's just like, every little variation or variability, like, pondering upon at what point do we kind of transition in terms of a change or a move into a variation into another substance, really, another matter of substance by, going from one change to the next. And so, again, there's a bit of an acquired taste with him, but then as you do acquire that taste, you find him just so, satisfying. Because he's just so stinking exhaussive in what he has to say.
Yeah. And even practical at times, which is when you read it for the first time, you're like, how is this practical? I make an analogy to at least coming into Aquinas at first, kind of like going into the Vatican Museum for the first time. And if you've ever been there, it's literally miles of just art. And some of it's old, some of it's from ancient Greece and Rome and Egypt, and you're kind of like wondering, why is this in the Vatican Museum? Why are these Greek gods and different things? But then you see all these beautiful things that you're familiar with, but it's a lot, and it's kind of overwhelming. And I found myself the first time, I was like, man, I really should be appreciating this, but I'm just overwhelmed. I don't know where I'm going. This is really long. I'm exhausted, and it's like being able to slowly take it piece by piece and get spend time with it instead of rushing through it is some of the key to beginning to go into that.
Sure. Yeah. I don't think you pick up everything that Aquinas has to say on the first reading. I mean, I think that's probably true on most readings. Like it's difficult to understand or to come to understanding, and it takes multiple attempts in most things before we even start to really grasp the subject matter at hand. And certainly Aquinas is no different, but he is distinctive in how logical he is, and then maybe how, to your point, how ordered he is. And so, and it's a treatment, as you work through his Summa and the various parts, he's got just dozens, hundreds of questions and, proposed variations, and then the faults that he finds with people who would argue against him. He anticipates, someone's, in almost a debate style of like what they would have to say against me, and then is already responding against that. And so whether you agree or disagree with him, you at least have got a full treatment of what he had to say on the matter. It's like you almost feel like he couldn't have said anything else. Like there isn't, like he's considered all possibilities, one might suggest. So with some of those thinkings, in mind, and that present introduction to Aquinas, what would it be like to have Thomas Aquinas be your financial advisor? I'm sure one of the first things he would do, Chris, is just get you organized, because like that's how Thomas works, right? He's a man of order.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you find maybe is some of his saying? Like one of the things that we really want to examine more closely in our conversation today, but is a bit of a point of tension, I think I would say, in Catholicism, within Christianity, especially a point of tension in our work, which, we as financial advisors are trying to improve the financial lives and matters, the well-being of our clients. And, we do that in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways we seek to do that mentally is manage their money and protect it or grow and accumulate it. And so, part of financial successful engagement, at least in some part, is seeing your finances become more and more and to move you into greater and greater financial wealth and away from maybe destitution or poverty or chaos, right? But then we have, this, scriptural passage, it's a prominent one, with the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus and the giving of the Beatitudes, which are always just so compelling and hit you every time you read them. And in some ways, it's like the full summary of the gospel. And, one of those Beatitudes specifically is, blessed are you poor, or happy are you poor. And depending on, who you're reading, maybe you would get an additional extension of happy are you poor in spirit. But, the gospel writers have different, reads of what was said. So on a very simple level, it's happy are you poor, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And so, well, shoot, like all the work that we do as financial advisors, is it for nothing? Like, are we doing our clients a disservice by trying to improve their finances? It's happy are you poor. And so, Chris, I'm kind of curious, like, what would Thomas Aquinas, as your financial advisor, in your opinion, have to say about Jesus's, beatitude on happy are you poor?
And I would first say I've felt this myself in this job, and even before this, when I was in focus. And one of the things that stick out to me as a beginning of a paradigm shift, even before I get into Aquinas, is when I was right out of college, first year in focus. We're fundraising our salary, so it's not like we are making a lot of money or anything like that. But Archbishop Chaput was our bishop, because I was in Boulder, Colorado, and he came for a question and answer session, and somebody asked him something about poverty and money in general, and he told this story about a couple that has this opportunity to get into a business and sell it for millions of dollars, or they have another opportunity to sell everything they have currently and go into live in poverty and mission in a different country. And he said, they said, what should we do, Archbishop Chaput? And he said, do the business deal. We need wealthy, good Catholics to be able to influence and give and be generous. And I was really not expecting that answer. So going on to Aquinas, he has a really great commentary on Matthew, but specifically on the Beatitudes. And he sees this as one of Christ's pivotal teaching moments. He compares it to Moses and the Ten Commandments, and this as the new law, similar to what Moses was giving as the law. And he, in general, when it's talking about this, he sees almost an order with how the Lord is moving, and you see the same order in how he's talking about happiness in his Summa, the first part of the second part where he addresses happiness. And it starts with the exterior goods, and money is his first thing that he goes after in his Summa. And this is similar with Christ. One of the first thing he goes at is poor in spirit in Matthew, and Luke just says poor. But in his commentary, he talks about the interior disposition versus the exterior disposition. And, we see this in other hard sayings about wealth from Christ. in general, in his take on this in his commentaries. And he also did a great job of bringing other commentaries before him in something called the Katina Arya, where he just put together all commentaries in the past and kind of put them all together. From those two different things, what I've seen him say a lot is that interior versus exterior, the interior disposition versus the exterior of, let's say, poverty. And he says it's completely possible for somebody to actually be poor exteriorly, but attached interiorly, and not actually have a poor spirit or be poor in spirit. And he says it's the opposite as well. If you have wealth, you can have a great amount of wealth, but still have that interior disposition of being poor in spirit. So he would say in general that, especially with his life and the religious life, taking the vow of poverty is an easier way to remove obstacles between you and God. But he completely affirms that it is okay to have wealth to an extent and understand that it is a blessing from God and that we are supposed to be stewards and follow what he calls liberality, which is a virtue of being able to give, especially when you run into abundance.
Yeah, let's push pause on that for just a moment, Chris, because I would like to pivot and explore this notion of liberality, perhaps as an antidote to money, or maybe just better stated as like a fruit, like a sign that you are using money virtuously, like in a good way. Like if it's being done correctly, we should then see this notion of liberality as part of your money management. And so that would be like a fascinating confirmation that, hey, we are managing our money the right way if we see liberality. But it is worth noting. I mean, there are certainly very strong passages in the scripture. Another one that comes to mind, and I don't know the scripture well enough to be able to quote it to you, but it's, it's about the rich man. It's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than the richer enter into the kingdom.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
It's a pretty hard statement too, of like, it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. Like, wow, it's a little hyperbole, I'm sure, but like, that's a strong statement, right?
And again, on that commentary, he talks about what is our end? Is wealth the end, and is that what we are attached to and committed to? Or is wealth a means? And he makes that distinction even in his commentary on that. But yeah, that's a hard one. Yeah.
Well, so then I think this builds upon, as Aquinas is addressing some money principles, one of them is this notion of what is our happiness? Like, how do we find fulfillment, like contentment, like enjoyment in life? And then in a particular way, he addresses, as he's looking into how we might achieve that, how money can be a distraction from that end, right? And so maybe, Chris, we could have you just elaborate a little bit on why is money problematic? Like, it's not that money in itself is problematic. It can be perfectly fine, as I think we've confirmed. We've talked about this in multiple shows. Like, money in itself is not wrong. I mean, even St. Paul didn't say that it's, money itself, it's the root of all evils, it's the love of money, right? And so money in itself isn't the problem, it's our response to money. And so, like, how is money problematic in the eyes of Aquinas as he considers the principles of happiness?
Sure. So he gets into happiness when he first begins to talk about human nature. And it's funny, him and Aristotle, they both agree. One thing that we as humans can agree on is that we all want to be happy, which is pretty amazing. We can find something that we agree on, but it points to something. But the disagreement on is what we disagree on is, how do you get there? How do we find happiness? And what he does is he goes through and he puts false positions of happiness, and he shows why those are not correct. And the first one's money. And it was a problem back then, it seems, because that's where he goes first, similar to here. I'm sure it's a little bit different, but what he talks about in general, and this actually relates very well to the Beatitudes, because the word beatitude actually means happy. So he's saying, happy are you, poor in spirit. So when it comes to money, it's a confusing thing. And the challenge that he talks about is that money has a sense of the infinite, or it's endless. There's not a cap on how much money you can make. As we might see with some of our clients, they may be in businesses where they get to a point where they don't have to do much, and that can return a great deal. And if that's your end, then it's very attractive, because we are meant for something infinite, but it's not money. So he says that money can confuse us and almost feel like a god, because what we're actually seeking is happiness and fulfillment in that infinite, which is God. So the idea of it being quantitative, and for us even more than maybe then, the idea of quantity equals quality to us, right? So how much, even myself, I struggle with this, how much I make or how much I have, it's so easy to identify that with just me, my identity, having a quality life, where real quality is relationship with my family, having meaning in my life, being generous, and especially relationship with God. So it's easy to get that quantitative aspect all kind of mixed up with what's really important. And again, the big idea there is it's mimicking our desire for God, and it almost feels like that in a sense that it's not ending, it's not capped. Where later on in the Summa he says, really, the thing that should be pursued without measure is charity. So it almost like takes that place and of what we should be pursuing is charity, love of God, love of a neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, I think to build or add on to what you're saying is like, why do we like or why do we want money? Like, what does it get for us? And it gets us what we want. It gets us what we need too, hopefully. I mean, it should be doing that, presumably by de facto. Although it may not. We could use money inappropriately and not actually get what we need. But like, why do we like money? It's because, well, it becomes a means for us to get what we want. And the more money we have, the more we get to have the way things we want them to be. And it gets to be just our wants and wants and wants. And it just is almost endless. And it's just like, well, what could be wrong or bad about that? I mean, me getting everything the way I want, like, why would that be a bad thing? I mean, we are kind of wired to get what we want. But I think that's kind of the height of like, well, actually, this is where it becomes problematic, is you getting everything the way you want it isn't actually what's good for you. I mean, I think that's where the Christian message just says, hey, it's good that money is getting what you want, but it can't get you everything you want, because you're basically turning yourself into your own God. But if you just get what you want, that's effectively all you ever need is you. And like, just like take a moment and think about that. Does that make sense? Do you really think that the only thing you need in your life is yourself to make you happy and satisfied? And I think if you take a moment and say, no, like I cannot possibly be my own source of happiness completely. Like, then what's money doing for me then in getting me just what I want?
And it plays right back to the blessed are you poor in spirit. And Aquinas says it gives you a sense of power that you can buy whatever you want and control. But the poor in spirit recognizes I am nothing. I'm created out of nothing. Every breath I take is a gift from God. So if I would have good things in my life, the abilities that I have, the opportunities that I have, they're all gifts. And he can choose to take my life and my things whenever he wants. So it's approaching it, again, back to the reality or the proper order of things, is that me to God, I am in poverty. I am nothing. He is everything. And the money gets in the way of that because it gives you a sense of power, control.
Right. Well, and then it gets you back to yourself, which I think it's maybe the insight that I'm seeing in this is like, look, I can't be God. I'm not God. I think I can clearly recognize and see that I am not the infinite one. And so money curving back to me and allowing me to get everything that I want is trying to suggest that somehow I can be the source of my own satisfaction.
Sure. Yeah.
And if I can't be, then money, in as far as it's doing that, is I suppose corruptive. Like it's leading me to the wrong direction. And this is where it's an idol. Like it's an idol being that we're worshiping the false god, the wrong god, the thing that actually won't make you happy. And we can often say we're trying to worship money, but what I'm finding rather fascinating about this conversation is what you're doing is you're just worshiping yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
You're just using money as a means to go and achieve it. And so it's just like, let's stop using money to bring all the worship back to me, but instead let's direct it to the one who can actually achieve these goals, these ends. And I think maybe that, so perhaps just to back that up a little, Chris, I mean, I'm sure this is the answer, but I'm kind of curious to get your take on what Aquinas would have to say. I mean, I imagine, Aquinas says, look, the only end, the only satisfaction, the only means by which you are happy is in relationship or union with God. I mean, does he give consideration that there could be anything else that could potentially make you happy? I'm kind of curious as to why.
Sure. Yeah, no, he does. He says, he breaks down two elements of happy. He says there's an imperfect happiness that can be had here on earth, and the perfect happiness, which is the attainment of our end, which is the beatific vision. So when he's talking about all these things, he talks about the exterior goods as if it's the end. So money is one of those exterior goods. If it's the end, yeah, that's a problem. But if it's a means to be used to order your life properly towards your proper end, then you can have an element of imperfect happiness even here on earth. And you can think about it that if you do have money, so if I have money for my family and we're not destitute, we can more easily focus on helping people being generous, or focus on prayer and contemplation and learning, focus on true, good, and beautiful things and leisure, and expose my children to the type of thing that is leading them to God. Whereas if I'm destitute, all I'm thinking about, where's my next meal? How am I going to feed my family? So in a sense, it can be utilized for good. And so the imperfect happiness is, in his mind, is based on contemplation. So contemplating divine things and living virtuously, living a life of virtue. So it's not going to be perfect here. It's imperfect, but you can have elements of it. And it's an analogy. So the good things here are an analogy to what we're actually going to experience, the good things in heaven, the beatific vision, things like that.
Well, what I'd like to do, Chris, is to start to circle back to this notion of liberality that we had made mention earlier in the conversation, because, it's kind of like the height, the good use, the proper use of money. And again, if we had Thomas Aquinas as your financial advisor, he's going to order and organize your life and direct you to what your proper end and the means by which you have happiness is back to God. But he's not going to tell you that, to answer one of these questions that we've been raising, like he's not going to tell you that it's wrong to have money, or it's wrong to grow your money, or it's wrong to improve your financial situation. So like the work of financial advisors, thankfully, we're spared, or at least we at least achieving that end or goal is not us abusing either our clients or ourselves, or abusing our relationship with God, but that's all actually properly ordered. At least it can be. It's not a bad step in the right direction. But it is, it's not the ultimate end. It's just simply to grow your money. The ultimate end is to ultimately be in relationship with God, which should, in our take on it, should move you towards an awareness of the needs of others and being generous in those needs, and not hoarding all this money, for yourself, especially once you're at a place of abundance. And so, Chris, I really want to get your thoughts on that. But before I do, folks, if you found this conversation, fascinating and interesting and beneficial, I mean, we do have a whole network of Catholic advisors and the Catholic Financial Planners Network, in which this is a common theme that we're always digging into and discussing and considering. And so just invite and encourage you, if you're looking for someone to help you with these questions, to reach out to the network and, to see if there's maybe an advisor that would be a good fit for you. You can help navigate not just the complexities of money, but especially maybe the complexities of not money and, faith and finances together. So just want to make a little plug to the Catholic Financial Planners Network before we kind of pivot into, which hopefully would be the goal of what all the advisors in the network are seeking to do for their clients, which is, helping them achieve this virtue of liberality. And so can you, Chris, maybe just share a little bit of what is that? How do we know when we are, we're achieving the mission, mission, what's the word? Mission control or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. So he talks about this idea specifically under justice, but he also hits on it under charity when he talks about almsgiving. And, first on the almsgiving part, he wants to make a point that if you're not taking a vow of a religious to live in that poverty, that you can and you should have what you need, not only to just take care of the necessities so that you have food to eat, but he says, live according to your state of life. So that means you should kind of, in a sense, not stick out too much because you're wearing clothes that are like extremely old and have holes in it, or driving a car that barely works. It's okay to live a life becoming to your state, which can actually be helpful, he says, like socially and things like that. So he says that's okay, and the extreme would be to live a life of destitution when you're not called to that. But he does say...
Yes, just to interject briefly there. So, I mean, if you're a successful business owner who's worth millions of dollars, but you're a good Christian, good follower of the gospel, a faithful Catholic, it's okay for you not to show up to some social event, with all patched up, pants and
exactly.
suit jacket, right? You can have, nice clothes and kind of demonstrate your wealth even with the nice clothes. Like that's not problematic.
Yep. And that's backed up by scripture. That's backed up by one of the quotes that he has even under that I like, and I'll read it real quick. Why are you rich while another is poor? And again, this is from St. Basil, a quote from St. Basil that he uses in the text. Why are you rich while another is poor? Unless it be that you have the merit of good stewardship and he have the reward of patience. So it's understanding what you have as a blessing and that you are a steward. So where he begins to pivot into the liberality and almsgiving portion is that he distinguishes between necessity and abundance. And there comes a point where that necessity becomes abundance. And it's not a static thing. It changes. It's not going to always be the same. But once you become once you get to a place where you are where you have a lot of abundance, he says that is where you almost owe that to folks that don't have what they need. So you get to a point where you will become a hoarder, start hoarding what is almost other people's things when you get over that point. So that's the first thing that I think is really interesting, and where I think my wife and I, and what I like to challenge, especially my clients that are, intentional about this, is it's not going to be static, but what is that point or that cap on what you need versus what's abundance? And that's also, it's keeping in mind retirement accounts and savings, everything like that. But what is that point that you begin to get that abundance? And then how can we turn that into liberality and stewardship?
Right. And I would suppose minimally, like one way to just test this is like, well, look, are you tithing, and are you giving at least 10% of your income, possibly your wealth, to charity? And so if that's not something we're accomplishing, but we're wanting to move towards liberality, and, again, it's fine to be removed from hardship in life. That's one of the benefits of having good money management, is to some level, like some of the challenges that you have when you have very little income go away. And so you get to have the benefits of the fruits, or the ease even of being freed of that burden. Of course, there's other burdens that come with money, financial success. And so it's not like we're completely carefree, but, moving out of that's not a bad thing, right? It's good to recognize that poverty is a challenging and a hard life. And, we don't necessarily wish anyone to have that in its own right. Like in some ways we would want everyone moved out of poverty. We should, that's what we should be working towards, which in some ways, that's the point of liberality, is where, look, if you're at a point now where not only have you moved out of hardship, but it's like, you've got so much money that you have more than what you need. That's what I suppose what we mean by abundance. We have an obligation then, not just to, at least minimally, you got to hit the tithe, but you might be asked or called to do, even more. And failing to do that, would be at least minimally, I suppose that's just the nature of God, right? I mean, all of us exist. We fundamentally believe, because God is just so giving of himself, that he poured, his life out into creation, and voila, here's creation. And so if that's fundamentally true, we can't be hoarding his creation and then not reciprocating this self-giving unto others. Right? Charity
itself is self-giving. And that's why he puts the almsgiving piece under charity. Because if we're if we're going to be charity, we're not going to, or if we're going to live charity, we're not going to hoard, but we're going to give, because that's just the nature of charity. And under the liberality itself is under justice. So it's not justice per se, but it's connected to justice, because he kind of hints at a little bit of that abundance is almost like it's not yours. And further on in that quote that I said, if you keep going, it says, when you bury this or that type of treasure, you're burying somebody else's treasure. So I think it's strong words, but I think you also have to realize that each person is going to struggle with this in different ways. And, if you grow up in a place where you maybe lived in a little bit of poverty, or grew up in with like my mom grew up with a mom that grew up in that, and she kept that sort of spirit alive, right? For me, it's hard to be liberal sometimes, hard to have that liberality. And even Aristotle, when he's talking about the virtue of liberality, he says, if you grew up on the other side of it, being tight-fisted, it's really hard to become liberal. He said, you actually naturally will drift more towards being tight-fisted, as opposed to if you grew up liberal, you can, it almost like potentially on the extreme of that, you can more easily moderate yourself to having a good relationship with that. So just understanding yourself and where you fit to all of that, I think is really helpful in being able to pray through that and put that into that conversation or relationship with the Lord. And you get to a point where sometimes the Lord may surprise you with what he asks, but being ready for that and open for that, because the step above liberality is magnificence. So if you are blessed with a lot, magnificence is liberality, but on steroids. It has to do with large sums and great plans and generosity. So it's not just a little bit, it's like a lot. So being almost ready to, at times, be open to do things that maybe you weren't expecting. And I think that's just an element in being able to know yourself and know the Lord and allow him to lead you.
Well, I think I have one final question, Chris, that I want to run by you, and then we'll have to, wrap things up and have you just share a little bit more about yourself if someone would like to reach out. But we have this, push to say, look, again, let's not turn money into an idol. Effectively, it's you turning yourself into a god because you're getting everything that you want, via the money. And so we can say that, hey, we're not maybe rational enough. It's easy enough to say, I'm not God. Most people wouldn't find that as a convincing argument. But at some point, we're here because God poured himself out. And so we're moved to pour ourselves out, or at least that's, if we're being faithful to the gospel, like that's the movement that we should be finding within ourselves. And like the height of virtue is the height of good money management. And so in a particular way, the people who can pour themselves out more the most are the people who have the most, who have been most richly blessed and have the most money, and they can pour themselves out maybe rather graciously or aggressively even. And so I would wonder, like, is there another side of this where it gets to be too much, or would it be the wrong course of action where you pour too much out? And I'm just kind of curious. I don't think it doesn't seem like that would be inherently wrong or against the gospel message, but there's a part where maybe like that. Maybe you are misreading the gospel. It's not like, is that a command or a requirement would be my question. Like, do you have to deplete yourself back to poverty if you're in a place of abundance? So,
no, and I think it goes back to prudence and even responsibility. For me as a family man, it would be imprudent, irresponsible to drain all of our accounts for other people. It would be ignoring the people that God has put in my life to take care of. And, the poverty itself is a calling, especially that radical poverty that you might find in a religious life. But even diocesan priests aren't called to that sort of poverty. So it's a very specific thing that isn't taken lightly. It shouldn't be taken lightly. And, going back to Thomas, he addresses that. He addresses a lot of things, but he addresses that specifically and says, no, you shouldn't do that. You need to take care of the duties that you have first, and that's the necessity part. And sometimes you can give from that necessity in order to be virtuous or specific circumstances. But if it shouldn't harm your state of life and who you have responsibility towards.
No.
So it's kind of an important distinction there. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's just a good way to sum it up, because I know of it in my own experience. I've seen folks who feel almost, especially let's say in an inheritance or a windfall arrangement, where they suddenly find themselves in a large sum of money, perhaps they weren't expecting, and now they feel uncomfortable with that and feel like even, called to get rid of it all. It really would be almost the way they would put it, because it's almost like they see it as like a burden or a temptation or a worry, and it's like, well, wait a second, I can't have any of this money. Like, this is going to be problematic. And it is true that, yeah, it could be problematic, but maybe like
It could be.
Yeah, you getting rid of it isn't necessarily the virtuous response. Like maybe you're supposed to have the responsibility to manage this well, right? And you're being asked to shoulder that.
Exactly. And being able to not give it all away at the same time, but let opportunities come up for you to slowly give it to different things and different opportunities that come up. But just because you have wealth, that doesn't mean you can't live in a spirit of poverty. That doesn't mean you can't fast at times. You can't deny yourself things where you actually should do those things. So it's being able to set yourself through your daily life in a disposition of that poor in spirit, as opposed to being that attached to things of this world, wealth and comfort and all these different things. You can still live that poor in spirit even if you have a lot of money.
Sure. Yeah. So we're not, going against the beatitude, happy are you poor in spirit. And then if you come into this money to be like, I'm failing the beatitude, I got to get rid of it. Like that's a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding.
It comes down to the idea of stewardship, and even in the parable of the talents, even just the word economic comes from the Greek stewardship or ordering of a household. And that's where we get the idea of stewardship from. And you see Christ talking about stewardship. It has an economic ring to it. And, the parable of talents, different things. When you're nervous about stewarding what you've been given, you can make bad choices as well. So, again, it's all rooted in a relationship with Christ and discernment, but the idea of stewardship is kind of what's key.
Right. And so, all this just requires, I think, prayerful consideration and discernment, but it isn't necessarily the outcome of it. If you're in a place of abundance in which you have to be so abundant that, at the end of your lifetime or someone's lifetime, that it's all gone. Like, that's not necessarily, I think the virtue of liberality is to give it all away. But perhaps, maybe God is calling you to be asked to that, but maybe he's not. Like, God is a generous God. He's super abundant in himself. Look at creation and nature. And so like, there's a vast array of wealth. And so like, wealth is not inherently wrong or bad, but it is what we choose to do with it, which is problematic. And you choosing not to manage it well is still not, you getting rid of the money isn't eradicating the problem, because what's problematic is you just don't want to manage it well, which is really the thing that needs to change. And so maybe to be challenged, by this money is actually, and be pushed to conversion with it, is really what the intended outcome of that is. So I thought it important to share some of that, because I've seen this at times, and it's just, I think, maybe a misunderstanding of what the gospel message is, where, we have the Son of God, has no place to lay his head at night. Foxes have dens and birds have nests in the air. And so there is this incredible statement, Jesus comes into Bethlehem, he's born in the manger, he's born into nothing. It's the utter simplicity of the family life. And, very much moves us and wants us hopefully to all echo and follow him. And so there is like God ordered so far out where he took himself from a place from the throne down to nothing. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you come into money like that, you have to necessarily do the same. At least that's my thought. I'm kind of curious, Chris, would you agree or think similarly?
No, yeah, totally. It's very confusing. You can go to Mass on Sunday and hear a homily on some of these teachings, and then the next Sunday you go to Mass and it's the fundraiser. First you have too much money, and then you have not enough money, and it is confusing. And it's a delicate balance, and it's a discernment. And I think the challenge with us, logically and even psychologically, is to think of it's a one-size-fits-all, compare ourselves, and where God is a God of diversity in the great sense of not everybody is the same, but everybody is loved and called to live out their own particular life and mission. So just because one person has poverty, that doesn't mean I need that. And it's easy for us to impose what we think on others, whether it is with this or other doctrines or whatever we think are important, but we need to rely on the church to tell us this and our personal relationship with Christ. So yeah, coming into money itself is not intrinsically evil. It can easily be. So if you would, I would say, yeah, this is your opportunity to go to prayer and to really examine yourself and your intentions and set a plan that you're not going to fall into the temptations, but you also don't want to lean the other way and just give it all away recklessly when maybe God had a different plan in mind for laying that in your lap. So.
Got it. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, Chris. I think you've shed so much insight in the subject matter. You've done a wonderful job. I've really enjoyed having you on the show. If someone wanted to follow up with you and just connect more and perhaps learn about some of the services that you offer, what would be one of the means in which they should, reach out or follow up with you?
Yeah, you can just look me up on LinkedIn, something like that, and reach out. I'm happy to chat.
So good news. Well, Chris, among many of the things that you offer, not just your background and focus and the work that you do currently as a financial advisor, but one of the areas of focus too that you offer is as a certified exit planner. So if you maybe a business owner or something, and are looking for some exit planning strategies, you could potentially be working with someone who's at least looking to Thomas Aquinas, and asking the question, how would Thomas Aquinas advise? And so I'm sure you do that imperfectly, as we all do. I'm sure Thomas Aquinas would do it imperfectly as well, for what it's worth. But, it is a rather provocative question that you raise is, how would Thomas Aquinas advise you if he was your financial advisor? So I'm so glad you raised that question. You brought it as part of the show and we were able to discuss it in today's call.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Okay, well, for everyone else who's been tuning in, please, reach out to the Catholic Financial Planners Network. We're growing, every month. We're bringing on a couple new advisors. It's getting to be more and more. It's rather exciting and super fun. And so please turn to the Catholic Financial Planners Network if you're looking to either to become an advisor and be part of the network, or if you're looking for an advisor. I think we're up to 50 or so now in the network, so that's pretty amazing. So praise God for that. But between now and our next show, continue to listen. We'd love to get your feedback as well, but just wish God's blessings to all of you. Thanks so much for your time and attention today. God bless.